probably think the first great American city was Boston or Philadelphia. Maybe New York. It wasn't any of them. 1,000 years before those cities existed, there was already a massive city on American soil, bigger at the time than London. It had mounds of earth built entirely by hand. One of them was the tallest structure in America until the 1860s. Then, everyone left. Historians still don't agree on why. This is Cahokia. So first, let's just sit with how big this thing actually was, because I don't think people expect this. Before Europeans ever set foot in North America, before Columbus, there was a city sitting where the Mississippi and Missouri rivers meet. Historians call this area the American Bottom. And around the year 1050, something happened there that's honestly hard to explain. The population exploded fast. Before that, maybe a couple thousand people lived in the area. Within decades, it jumped to somewhere around 15,000 people in the city itself, with maybe twice that many more spread through the surrounding region. That's not normal growth. That's the kind of jump you usually only get from mass migration. People moving in from somewhere else, maybe by choice, maybe not. And once they were there, they built. Big. More than 100 mounds of earth across the site, some of them enormous. The largest one, now called Monk's Mound, covered about as much ground as the base of a great pyramid. No wheels, no draft animals, just people, carrying baskets of dirt, one load at a time, probably for decades. This was, without question, the largest city in what's now the United States before European contact. Nothing else in North America north of Mexico came close. Now, this wasn't just a pile of dirt with people camping around it. Cahokia had a real, structured society, and some of the evidence for that is honestly wild. Just outside the city's center, archaeologists found a massive circle of wooden posts, now called Woodhenge. It worked like a solar calendar. Stand at the right spot, and the posts line up perfectly with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes. This wasn't just for ceremony either. It told farmers exactly when to plant and when to harvest, which mattered enormously for a city this size trying to feed itself. There's also a burial site called Mound 72, and it's one of the most talked about discoveries in North American archaeology. Inside it, archaeologists found a man buried on a bed of over 20,000 shell beads, arranged in the shape of a bird. Nearby were dozens of other burials, including what looks like sacrificial victims, people buried specifically to accompany someone important in death. It's a pretty stark reminder that Cahokia wasn't some peaceful little village. It had real hierarchy, real power, and apparently real violence tied to that power. And Cahokia wasn't isolated either. Its people played a game called Chunky, rolling a stone disc across the ground and throwing spears to see who could land closest to where it stopped. Archaeologists have found chunky stones made at Cahokia scattered all over the Mississippian world, hundreds of miles away. Same with goods buried in Mound 72, copper, shell beads, and finely made arrowheads from as far as Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. This tells us Cahokia wasn't just a big city. It was a hub, connected to a massive trade network stretching across a huge part of North America. So this was a real, complex, powerful place. And then it just declines. Not overnight, more like a slow fade over a couple centuries. By around 1350 to 1400, it's essentially deserted. So what happened? Honestly, archaeologists still argue about this. And it's not because nobody's looked. Cahokia is one of the most studied ancient sites in North America. The problem is the Mississippian people who lived there didn't leave behind written records. No stone inscriptions telling us their side of the story, the way the Maya or the Aztec did. So everything we know comes from digging, soil, bones, plant remains, old trash pits, the layout of the buildings themselves. For a long time, the leading theory was that Cahokians basically wrecked their own environment, cutting down too much forest for firewood and construction, which caused flooding and erosion that made the land impossible to farm. It's a clean, simple story. Overuse your resources, and eventually you pay for it. Except newer research has actually pushed back on that pretty hard. A team of archaeologists went back and tested the soil directly, looking for the kind of erosion you'd expect if deforestation were really the cause. They didn't find it, which means one of the most widely repeated explanations for Cahokia's decline might just be wrong. So what's left? A few things, probably all tangled together.
There's real evidence of drought. Tree ring data shows several major dry periods hitting this whole region. One especially severe stretch happening right around the time Cahokia's decline was picking up speed. There's also evidence of flooding, and this is the part that trips people up because it sounds contradictory. Too little water at times, too much at others. Major floods started hitting the area more frequently after around 1200, wrecking farmland right when the city needed it most. And then there's the human
human side of it. At some point, Cahokians built a wooden stockade wall around the central part of the city and rebuilt it multiple times over the years. That's not something you build for fun. Whether it was purely ceremonial or genuinely defensive is still debated. But either way, it tells us something had shifted. This wasn't the same confident, expanding city it had been a couple centuries earlier. So probably it wasn't one single dramatic collapse. It was likely years of compounding pressure, bad harvests, unpredictable flooding, food getting harder to secure, and maybe political strain or actual conflict on top of all of it, until enough people had had enough and they left. Not all at once, just gradually, family by family, until the city that once rivaled London in size was basically empty. And here's the part I think gets missed the most. This wasn't the end of the people. The Mississippian culture that built Cahokia didn't vanish into nothing. Their descendants carried that history forward. Nations like the Osage today trace their heritage directly back to this region and this culture. The city emptied out. The people didn't disappear. So next time somebody talks about the first great American city, it wasn't New York. It wasn't Boston. It was a mound-covered metropolis on the Mississippi River 1,000 years ago, home to more people than most European capitals of its time. And we still don't fully know why everyone left. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, the parts of American history that somehow never made it into the textbook. And tell me in the comments, had you heard of Cahokia before this video? I'm curious how many people actually know this place existed.